ahead.
Florida State is a different team than they were through the first 11 weeks. Coach Norvell, their players, their fans, an incredible season. But as you look at who they are as a team right now, without Jordan Travis, without the offensive dynamic that he brings to it, they are a different team. And the committee voted Alabama 4 and Florida State 4.
Basically quoting Kirk Herbstreit and everybody else bar for bar, word for word, which tells me that ESPN was 110% using their influence that they have in the sports world combined with the ties that we all know that they have to the SEC network in order to make sure that an SEC team got in. Let's just call an ace and a spade a spade. I mean, come on, if you go back and you look at it, let's listen to the words from Kirk Herbstreit and tell me that if you see any difference between what he just said and what the committee, between Kirk Herbstreit and the committee. Listen to this.
Me, if you took J.J. McCarthy off of Michigan, we'd be saying the same thing right now about Michigan. If you took Michael Penix off of Washington the last 2 games and they were struggling with a backup quarterback, we wouldn't be looking at the totality of Washington's season. We'd be looking at the last 2 games. You have to look at the last couple games without the heart and soul. This guy is the face of this resurgence of Florida State, Jordan Travis, and to take him out is just as big as any player in the country that you would take off that roster. So to me, it's a reflection of what he meant to that team specifically. And these last 2 weeks, giving Tate and giving Brock the backup, the third string guy, an opportunity. And it's just a reality. You're comparing them, Alabama to Florida State. You got to give Alabama the nod, even though they had a close game against Auburn in a rivalry game. They beat Georgia on a neutral site, and Georgia was the team, and Alabama just beat them. You cannot take Alabama out of this.
Okay, so we can't take Alabama out of this because they beat the number 1 team in the country. But why did the number 1 team in the country fall all the way to why did they fall 5 spots? Explain. There's no logic here. And legitimately what the committee just said, we don't give a damn how many games you win. But then again, I've been saying that about all the previous committees before this one, long before. They do not care if you go undefeated, because obviously Liberty's not going to get in. I said about Cincinnati a couple of years ago that the committee was not waiting for Cincinnati to win the way that they were in Alabama or in Ohio State. They were waiting for Cincinnati to lose. You could tell in the way that they projected everything. It was hidden in their comments. It was reflective in their comments. They weren't waiting for Central Florida to win. They were waiting for Central Florida to lose. And I've been saying this since the BCS days. Utah, they got screwed. Boise State, they got screwed. TCU, they got screwed. The conference championship apparently doesn't matter. And look, I don't want to hear any more about Florida State being on their third string quarterback. When 12 Gauge took over for the Buckeyes a decade ago, nobody got on national television. Not one damn person got on national television at any network and said, well, did you know that there's a bylaw where, they should take injuries into account? Nobody brought that up. Nobody said that. Nobody did the research and investigation on that, did they? It's got to be the best 4 teams. If you are undefeated, you are in a Power 5 conference, which every committee has talked about being a Power 5 conference. Every single committee. There's not a committee that has not brought that up. Every single committee has brought up being undefeated, a Power 5 conference. It is a foregone conclusion that you are headed to the CFP. I can promise you right now, and I mean this, if we were talking about Alabama and them being on their backup quarterback because of an injury to Jalen Milroe, and we were talking about them being on maybe even their third string quarterback, and they were an undefeated conference champion out of the SEC, not one damn person would be bringing this up. Not one. And by the way, ESPN, thank you, because I was the one that brought up the success of the ACC over the SEC, not just this year, but in national championship games as well. Let's not forget about Clemson beating Alabama. Let's not forget about Florida State beating up Auburn. Well, they didn't beat them up, but they came back. They were down big in that game. And then they ended up coming back. And I don't want to hear about the quarterback. It's the most important position on the football team. And if you take the quarterback away, again, nobody said that about Ohio State, but there are plenty of football teams that if you took the quarterback away, they would be just as good. Because in Ohio State this year, I said from the beginning, Marvin Harrison Jr. is the reason why Ohio State was any good offensively at all. From the jump when I saw Kyle McCord play against Indiana, I did not think he had what it took to be a D1 quarterback or at least get you to a championship game. Not going to happen. They were reliant 100% on that defense and Marvin Harrison Jr. But that didn't stop the committee from ranking them really high, did it? Ohio State had no idea who their quarterback was going to be. And they continued to justify the win over Notre Dame. And just to make sure that the SEC had a strength of schedule, they made sure to keep Tennessee ranked, even though they were a 7-4 football team over other teams, by the way. I mean, did anybody see Miami of Ohio play? Both of those teams finished at 11-2, and neither one of them were ranked going into that football game. At least over the last 10 years, we've had football teams like that ranked somewhere in the top 25. Liberty was at 24. I mean, they didn't even try. This committee did not watch football all year long. They sat around and they listened to Kirk Herbstreit and all these other analysts talk. They didn't make any judgment for themselves. And by the way, like I said before, all you had to do was go and look at the coaching poll and realize that the coaches poll was exactly what they were following for a good majority of the season. This committee has to be the worst that I have ever seen. They don't ever answer questions directly. Everything is, like last weekend, he was asked, what played into that? Well, yeah, just a really good football game to watch. That was a good game to watch? That's what you're justifying this on? How in the hell can you justify watching football and go, man, that was a really good game? But yeah, so anyways, that's what's going on. And then not talk about anything specific as to why they had the win. What were the variations? What were the variables? Oh, nobody would want to play Alabama right now. Look, I have said for a long time that Alabama is a very improved football team, and Alabama would beat Texas right now in a rematch. But the way that it is Texas beat Alabama at Alabama, regardless of when it was, they beat them. The only other game that they played that was really significant was the OU game, which they lost. They won the Big 12 championship, but against a very mediocre Oklahoma State football team. The Big 12 every year is supremely overrated, but they can at least say they have that win. They jumped Texas from number 7 to number 3. They jumped Georgia all the way down the pike. The committee literally makes it seem like they have no idea what they're doing. They have no clue what they're watching. They don't understand what they're looking at. This has got to be the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. To hell with going undefeated, bro. It doesn't matter anymore. If you are Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, if you are Texas, if you are one of their little favorites, because that's what this is about, their favorites and their TV ratings and all this other BS that they're also scared of, if you're one of their little favorites, doesn't matter. I memean, I guarantee you next season, we are going to see undefeated football teams like Liberty left out for 10-3, 9-4 football teams. I promise you, it is going to happen. I do not know how you can sit down and look yourself in the mirror and think to yourself, this football team faced some really insurmountable odds. All year long, everybody talked about how good Jack Plummer was. They didn't score 10 points against Florida State. It does not make sense. You will never get it to make sense to me.